Winterfest was designed to be a sanctuary of light, a carefully curated illusion where glittering decor and orchestral holiday music could briefly drown out the poisonous rhythms of Fairmont Crest. The crowd moved as a single organism, laughing, toasting, posing for cameras, each person rehearsing their role in a community where appearances were not merely social currency, but survival. Yet beneath the spectacle, the night carried an edge, the faint metallic taste of something about to break. Leslie sensed it long before anyone else did. She had always been sensitive to fault lines, the smallest pause in conversation, the fraction of a second where a smile arrived too late, the quiet reorientation of bodies when certain names were spoken. She thrived in those fractures. Her anger lived there too, simmering beneath her elegance like a second heartbeat, because she never forgot who had tried to erase her, who had laughed at her ambition, who had treated her like an outsider permitted entry only as entertainment. Winterfest was supposed to be a celebration. For Leslie, it was a stage, and she had come prepared to turn that stage into a courtroom without judges, where she would decide who deserved to be humiliated and who deserved to bleed. When she pulled Marcel away from the crowd, she did it with the calm of someone who knew exactly where the knives were hidden. Her truth was not a rumor that could be shrugged off with charm. It was a fuse, and what made it dangerous was not only the damage it could do to the powerful families, but the fact that Leslie understood it could also destroy her if she misjudged the timing. That risk thrilled her and terrified her at the same time, and it sharpened her fury into something almost holy. She was tired of being told to wait her turn. She was tired of being treated as disposable. Tonight, she wanted consequences. Marcel was not a naive man, and that was why the truth hit him like a physical blow. He had built his life on controlled proximity to power, close enough to benefit, distant enough to deny. He was the kind of person who survived by understanding that in Fairmont Crest, the most valuable skill was not loyalty, but flexibility. Yet Leslie's revelation threatened the one thing flexibility could not protect, a collapse so wide it would swallow everyone standing near it. In the seconds after he absorbed what she was implying, Marcel's first reaction was not moral outrage. It was fear, sharp and humiliating. Fear that he had already been seen as part of the machinery. Fear that his previous silence could be framed as complicity. Fear that the people he had tried to appease would not hesitate to sacrifice him to save themselves. That fear ignited a rage he did not like acknowledging. The rage of a man who realizes he has been used as a shield. He had always believed he was choosing his compromises. Now he felt the walls closing in and understood that someone else had been choosing for him. His internal conflict became immediate and brutal. If he stayed silent, he might preserve his place in the hierarchy for a little longer, but he would become the kind of coward he despised. If he helped Leslie, he would be declaring war on families with money, lawyers, and the kind of influence that makes inconvenient people disappear. Marcel's anger was not just at the threat of ruin. It was at the fact that he had never truly been free, even in his most confident moments. He had been surviving inside a cage built from favors and fear. Leslie's truth was a key, but keys can open doors into fire. Leslie, watching Marcel struggle, felt a bitter satisfaction that surprised even her. She had grown so accustomed to being dismissed that she had begun to crave the moment when powerful men finally looked at her with something other than amusement. Marcel's fear was proof of her power. Yet it also triggered her own conflict. She wanted to burn the system down, but she also wanted to win within it. She wanted revenge, but she wanted security. She wanted to punish Fairmont Cost, but she also wanted to own it. Those desires collided violently in her chest because she understood what her revelation could unleash. Investigations, scandals, lawsuits, public humiliation, and the kind of chaos that does not spare anyone, not even the person who lit the match. Leslie was angry enough to accept that risk, but she was not careless. Her rage had strategy. She had spent too long being underestimated to waste this moment on emotional explosion. What she held was not simply a secret, it was leverage, and leverage demanded discipline. So even as her anger begged her to shout the truth into the crowd and watch everyone scramble, her mind calculated a slower cruelty, controlled release, targeted damage, the slow dismantling of reputations until the people who once mocked her were forced to beg for her mercy. The temptation was intoxicating because it offered her something she had never been given, control over the narrative. Yet the same temptation terrified her because it revealed how close she was to becoming what she hated, someone who measures human lives and outcomes. The brilliance of Winterfest, the lights, the music, the warmth, only made the darkness sharper. Leslie could see the rooms as Marcel saw them, not as holiday decoration, but as a map of alliances. Every cluster of guests was a coalition. Every laugh was a performance of belonging. Every camera flash was a tool of documentation that could either protect a person or destroy them. Marcel's mind started working faster, connecting Leslie's truth to the subtle patterns he had noticed over time: sudden changes in leadership, disputes that vanished overnight, rumors that were strangled before they could breathe, a string of unfortunate incidents that always seemed to benefit the same circle of people. He had dismissed those patterns as the ordinary cruelty of wealthy communities. Now he realized he had been witnessing a system, a machine with a hunger. And Leslie had just handed him proof that the machine had a secret core, something so rotten that if exposed, it would not merely embarrass families, it would implicate them in actions that could lead to prison, financial ruin, and social exile. Marcel felt anger rise in his throat like bile because he understood why the truth had been hidden, not to protect the community, but to protect the few who owned it. And if those people were willing to hide something this devastating, then there was no boundary they would not cross to keep it hidden. Marcel's fear transformed into a survival instinct, and survival instinct in Fairmont Crest often looked like cruelty. He began thinking like a cornered animal. Who would he sacrifice first if the war began? How quickly could he secure his own position? How could he ensure that if the explosion happened, he stood far enough away to avoid the shrapnel? Those thoughts disgusted him. They also felt necessary. As Leslie and Marcel stood outside the main flow of the crowd, the festival continued, unaware. But the atmosphere around them changed in microscopic ways. Leslie's gaze sharpened. Marcel's posture stiffened. They became two people carrying a bomb through a room full of candles. Leslie realized with a sudden sting of anger that Fairmont Crest thrived on this exact phenomenon. Secrets moving beneath celebrations, betrayals disguised as tradition, violence hidden behind charity. The community did not fear scandal as much as it feared losing control of who the scandal could hurt. That was the difference. Fairmont Crest did not care about morality, it cared about hierarchy. Leslie had always known this, but tonight she felt it in her bones. Her inner conflict turned savage. Part of her wanted to expose everything immediately and let the innocent suffer along with the guilty, because the innocent had benefited from silence. Another part of her remembered what it felt like to be collateral damage, to be destroyed by someone else's war, and that memory made her hesitate, not because she suddenly developed mercy, but because she recognized the strategic value of restraint. A clean strike hurts more than a chaotic fire. She wanted her enemies to know exactly who did it. She wanted them to look at her and realize she was not just a disruptor, she was an author rewriting the ending. Marcel, meanwhile, confronted the most humiliating truth of all. He had already made deals in the past that now looked dangerous. The favors he had accepted, the conversations he had ignored, the warnings he had dismissed, each one became a thread that could be pulled to strangle him. His anger turned inward, fierce and self-punishing, because he realized how easily he had been seduced by the illusion of safety. He had believed he could stay adjacent to power without being stained by it. He had believed he was clever enough to avoid consequences. Now he felt the first real consequences approaching like thunder. The negative reaction in him was not noble, it was defensive. He began resenting Leslie for bringing him into this, even though he knew the truth was not her invention. He resented her for forcing him to choose. He resented her because she was fearless in a way he was not. Yet he also resented himself more because he knew his resentment was the symptom of cowardice. The conflict made him volatile. If Leslie pushed too hard, Marcel could turn on her, not because he hated her, but because fear makes men do desperate things. Leslie could sense that volatility, and it made her angry too, because she refused to be the woman who hands someone power over her fate again. If Marcel betrayed her, she needed to be ready. If he tried to control her, she needed to crush him first. Fairmont Crest had taught her that trust without leverage was suicide. The secret itself began to take shape as something larger than any one person's wrongdoing. It was a chain, money laundering dressed as philanthropy, forged signatures disguised as administrative routine, accidents that removed inconvenient obstacles, hush payments that turned victims into liars, and a quiet network of enablers who rationalized everything as protecting the community's stability. Leslie's anger flared because she recognized the cruelty of that word, stability. Stability was what the powerful demanded while they harmed others. Stability was what they used to silence anyone who threatened them. It made her think of every time she had been told to calm down, to be patient, to stop making scenes. She had been ordered to protect a peace that had never protected her. Tonight, she wanted to break that peace. Marcel's fear escalated into a more dangerous emotion, paranoia. He began imagining the counterattack before it happened. He imagined people searching his past, dragging out mistakes, framing him as the villain to preserve the reputations above him. He imagined being blamed for a plan he did not create. He imagined losing everything and still being hated. That fear made him consider preemptive moves that horrified him, burying evidence, severing connections, cutting off vulnerable people, even sacrificing someone else to buy time. He hated those thoughts and could not stop them. That was the reality of being cornered in a place like Fairmont Crest. The wall does not force you to become better, it forces you to become sharper. Leslie watched Marcel's internal deterioration and felt her own conflict intensify. She needed him because he had access she did not, but needing him meant giving him proximity to her leverage. Proximity invited betrayal. Betrayal invited vengeance. Leslie's mind began mapping the scenario where Marcel turned against her, and in that scenario she became a predator first. The fact that she could imagine it so easily made her furious with herself. The fact that she could justify it made her feel powerful. Power and disgust twisted together until she could no longer separate her moral instincts from her survival instincts. Around them, Winterfest glowed brighter, as if mocking their darkness. People lifted glasses, embraced, took photos, whispered love into ears. Leslie saw those gestures as camouflage. Marcel saw them as potential witnesses. Every holiday song became a soundtrack to impending ruin. The irony was cruel. A night designed to symbolize togetherness was becoming the ignition point for fragmentation. Leslie's anger demanded a spectacle. She wanted the truth to detonate publicly, to watch the entire room freeze, to see the powerful faces struggle to keep smiling as their world cracked. Marcel's fear demanded quiet. He wanted controlled exposure, careful timing, the least damage to himself. Their motives collided again, and the collision made both of them uglier. Leslie became more ruthless. Marcel became more calculating. The tension between them became another fault line, and Leslie realized with a cold shock that Fairmont Crest did not need to destroy her with violence. It could destroy her by forcing her to rely on people who would betray her under pressure. That realization made her furious enough to harden into certainty. She would not be destroyed quietly. If she was going down, she would drag the entire system with her. The hardest decision arrived when Leslie understood that revealing the truth would also expose people who were not guilty of the original sin, but had been trapped by it. People who had kept silent because they were afraid, because they were coerced, because they had families to protect. Leslie had no interest in becoming a savior, yet she could not ignore the uncomfortable fact that her vengeance could create new victims. That created a conflict she hated, the faint presence of conscience. She tried to crush it, reminding herself of every humiliation she had endured, every door closed in her face, every time she had been treated like a disposable inconvenience. But the conscience persisted, not as morality, but as strategy. If she destroyed too much, she might lose control of the narrative. If she destroyed too little, she would be crushed by the people she exposed. She needed precision. Precision meant choosing who would bleed and who would be spared. Having to choose made her furious because it forced her into the very role she despised, the one who decides other people's fates. Yet she knew Fairmont Crest had been doing that to her for years. Now it was her turn. By the end of that exchange, Winterfest had not changed on the outside. The lights still twinkled, the music still played, people still smiled, but the night was no longer innocent. Leslie carried the fuse in her hand, and Marcel carried the knowledge of how quickly the fuse could burn backward. Both of them were now trapped in a war that had not yet announced itself. Leslie's anger had become a promise. She would not allow Fairmont Crest to swallow her truth and keep dancing. Marcel's fear had become a threat. He would not allow himself to be sacrificed without taking someone else down first. They were allies only by circumstance, and circumstance is unstable. The closer they moved toward exposure, the more their worst instincts would emerge. Leslie's hunger for revenge, Marcel's instinct for self-preservation. And as Winterfest reached its brightest peak, the real darkness settled into place, not as a dramatic shadow, but as a quiet certainty. Somewhere in that glittering crowd, the people who had built the secret were already watching, already sensing the shift, already preparing their counterattack. The explosion had not happened yet, but it was no longer avoidable. It was only a matter of who would light it, who would be standing closest when it blew, and who would discover too late that in Fairmont Crest, even a holiday miracle can be weaponized into a massacre of reputations.